The courtroom was alive with the usual hum of anticipation, lawyers rustling papers, spectators whispering in hushed tones, and the distant sound of a gavel striking in another chamber. Defense attorney Maya Johnson sat at the defendant's table, her gaze steady and professional. It was another day, another case. At least that's what she thought. The bailiff called the case the State of Michigan versus DeShawn Williams. Maya shifted slightly in her seat, her hands resting on the polished wood of the table. She glanced at the files in front of her. Armed robbery, assault, resisting arrest. A familiar ache of determination settled in her chest. Another young black man caught in the system, she thought. When the judge entered the courtroom, her world tilted. The man taking his seat at the bench was not a stranger. He was Marcus Thompson. Her Marcus. Her throat tightened as a flood of memories surged forward. The summer afternoons they spent playing basketball on the cracked courts of their Detroit neighborhood. The late-night conversations on her grandmother's porch, planning how they'd change the world together. The promises they made as teenagers to always fight for justice, no matter what. But the man sitting before her wasn't the boy she remembered. His shoulders were broader now, his face more angular with years of responsibility. Yet his eyes, those warm, determined eyes, were unmistakable. Maya's grip on her pen faltered. For the first time in her career, she hesitated. The courtroom seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as she tried to process the impossible. Marcus looked down from the bench, his expression carefully neutral, but recognition flickered in his eyes. He quickly looked away, his jaw tightening slightly. The courtroom waited. Maya forced herself to speak. "Your Honor, Maya Johnson representing the defendant." Her voice was steadier than she felt. Marcus nodded formally. "Proceed, counselor." As the prosecutor began their opening statements, Maya's mind raced. This wasn't just any case. This was DeShawn Williams, a 19-year-old kid who reminded her of Marcus at that age. And somehow she had to figure out how to separate her past from her present before it was too late. The courtroom blurred as Maya's mind drifted to a time long before her law degree and the cases that had made her reputation. She and Marcus had grown up on the same block in Detroit's East Side, two kids who refused to let their circumstances define them. Her grandmother's house was a small brick home with bars on the windows, while Marcus lived 3 doors down with his single mother who worked double shifts at the hospital. Their friendship had been inevitable. Two bright kids who saw beyond the struggles around them. She remembered how they met, not as strangers but as kindred spirits. It was during a community meeting at the local church when she was 12, and he was 13. The adults were discussing the latest wave of police harassment in their neighborhood, and while other kids fidgeted in their seats, Maya and Marcus listened intently. After the meeting, they'd walked home together. "You ever notice," Marcus had said, kicking a stone down the sidewalk, "how they always assume the worst about us? Like we're guilty before we even do anything?" Maya had nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "My grandma says that's why we gotta be twice as good, work twice as hard." "But what if being twice as good isn't enough?" Marcus had asked. "What if the system itself is the problem?" That conversation had sparked years of debate between them. They'd spend hours discussing law, justice, and their dreams of making a difference. Marcus wanted to be a judge, not just any judge, but one who would ensure fairness for everyone. Maya wanted to be a lawyer, defending those who couldn't defend themselves. Their bond deepened through high school, surviving the pressures of their environment and the expectations placed on young black students. They pushed each other academically, celebrated each other's victories, and provided comfort during the inevitable defeat. Everyone in the neighborhood knew them as inseparable, the girl who never backed down from a fight and the boy who saw solutions where others saw problems. But then college came, and with it the first real test of their relationship. Marcus received a full scholarship to Harvard, while Maya earned a spot at Howard University. The night before he left, they sat on her grandmother's porch one last time. "Promise me something," Maya had said, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Anything. Promise me we won't let distance change us. Promise me we'll still fight for the same things, even if we're fighting from different places." Marcus had squeezed her hand. "I promise. And when we're both lawyers, Judge," Maya had corrected with a smile. "You're going to be a judge, remember?" "Right. When I'm a judge and you're the best defense attorney in Detroit, we're going to change everything." They'd kept that promise through their first year of college, calling every week, writing letters, visiting during breaks. But then something shifted. The calls became less frequent, the letters stopped coming, and during winter break of their sophomore year, Marcus had seemed different, distant, guarded, as if he was carrying a weight he couldn't share. The last real conversation they'd had was a fight. Maya had confronted him about pulling away, and Marcus had said something that still echoed in her mind. "Sometimes doing the right thing means making sacrifices you never thought you'd have to make." She demanded an explanation, but he just walked away. By spring break, he'd stopped calling altogether. Maya had tried reaching out, but Marcus had become a ghost. She'd heard through mutual friends that he'd graduated summa cum laude, gone to Yale Law School, and eventually become the youngest federal judge in Michigan's history. But they'd never spoken again, until now. The prosecutor's voice snapped her back to the present. He was describing the alleged crime. DeShawn Williams was accused of robbing a convenience store at gunpoint, assaulting the clerk, and fleeing with $200 from the register. The prosecution painted a picture of a habitual offender who had escalated to violent crime. Maya studied her client as the prosecutor spoke. DeShawn was barely 19, thin and nervous, with the same haunted look she'd seen in too many young men from her neighborhood. His case file told a familiar story. Poverty, absent father, mother, working multiple jobs, falling through the cracks of an underfunded school system. But Maya had spent weeks preparing his defense, and she knew there was more to this story than the prosecution wanted to admit. The first witness was called to the stand, Officer Bradley Richards, the arresting officer. He was a 20-year veteran with a stern demeanor and an unwavering confidence in his testimony. The prosecutor walked him through the arrest, a 911 call about an armed robbery, a description of the suspect, and Richards finding DeShawn 6 blocks away, allegedly still carrying the stolen money. Maya watched Marcus as the officer testified. His expression remained neutral, but she noticed the subtle signs she remembered from their youth. The slight tension in his jaw when something didn't sit right, the way he tapped his finger once against the bench when he was thinking. When it was her turn to cross-examine, Maya rose slowly. This was her moment to begin dismantling the prosecution's case, but it was also her first real interaction with Marcus in 20 years. "Officer Richards," she began, her voice clear and strong, "you stated that you received a description of the suspect over your radio. Can you repeat that description for the court?" "Black male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a red hoodie and dark jeans. And when you encountered my client, what was he wearing?" Richards hesitated for just a moment. "A blue sweatshirt and khaki pants." Maya nodded, making notes on her legal pad. "So the clothing didn't match the description you received. Suspects often change clothes to avoid detection." "I see. And did you find a red hoodie in the vicinity where you arrested Mr. Williams?" "No. But thank you, Officer Richards. Now you mentioned that my client was found with money allegedly stolen from the store. How much money was reportedly taken?" $200. "And how much money did you find on Mr. Williams?" Richards shifted slightly. $87. Maya could feel the jury's attention sharpening. $87, not 200. "Did you search the area for the remaining money?" "We believed he had disposed of it. But you didn't find it, correct?" "Correct." Maya glanced up at Marcus and saw something she recognized, approved. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but she'd known him long enough to read the signs. He was following her line of questioning, and despite the professional distance he had to maintain, she could tell he was impressed. The cross-examination continued, with Maya systematically poking holes in the officer's testimony. By the time she finished, several jurors were taking notes, and the certainty that had characterized the prosecution's opening was beginning to crack. During the lunch recess, Maya found herself alone in the courthouse cafeteria, picking at a sandwich she had no appetite for. The morning had been surreal, facing Marcus across a courtroom, fighting for a client's freedom while battling her own emotional turmoil. She looked up to find Marcus standing beside her table, no longer wearing his judicial robes. In his simple white shirt and dark pants, he looked more like the boy she'd once known. Marcus. The name felt strange on her lips after so many years of silence. "Can we talk?" Maya gestured to the empty chair across from her. Marcus sat down, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation around them, but Maya felt as if they were in a bubble of silence. "I know this is complicated," Marcus finally said. "Complicated?" Maya couldn't keep the edge out of her voice. "That's one way to put it." Marcus looked down at his hands. "Maya, I want you to know that I won't let our past influence this case. Your client deserves a fair trial, and he'll get one." "I never doubted that," Maya said, and she meant it. Whatever had happened between them, she'd always known Marcus to be fundamentally decent. "But I have to ask, why didn't you recuse yourself?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because I knew you'd give him the best defense possible. And because," he met her eye, "because maybe it's time we both faced some things we've been running from." Before Maya could respond, Marcus stood up. "I should get back. But Maya, for what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've become. You're everything I knew you'd be." He walked away, leaving Maya with more questions than answers, and a heart that felt like it might break all over again. The afternoon session brought the prosecution's star witness, the convenience store clerk who had been robbed. Jennifer Walsh was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and nervous hands that shook slightly as she was sworn in. Her testimony was emotional and detailed. A young black man had entered the store around 10 p.m., demanded money from the register, and when she hesitated, he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. Maya watched the jury as Walsh testified. Several members seemed moved by her obvious distress, and Maya knew this was the moment that could make or break DeShawn's case. When the prosecutor finished his direct examination, Maya rose for what might be the most important cross-examination of her career. "Walsh," Maya began gently, "I know this was a traumatic experience for you, and I appreciate your courage in testifying today." The clerk nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders at Maya's respectful tone. "You stated that the robbery occurred around. Can you tell me about the lighting in your store at that time?" "It was, well, one of the fluorescent lights had been flickering for weeks. The owner kept saying he'd fix it, but you know how it is. So the lighting wasn't optimal?" "No, I suppose not." Maya nodded sympathetically. "And you said the perpetrator was wearing a hood. Did that obstruct your view of his face?" "Yes, somewhat." "Ms. Walsh, I want to be very clear about this next question. Are you absolutely certain that my client, DeShawn Williams, is the person who robbed your store?" Jennifer Walsh looked directly at DeShawn for the first time since taking the stand. Her expression was uncertain, troubled. He looks like him. But the hood and the lighting," she trailed off. "Take your time, Ms. Walsh. This young man's future depends on your answer." The clerk was quiet for nearly 30 seconds, the silence stretching through the courtroom like a held breath. Finally, she spoke. "I can't be absolutely certain. I'm sorry, but I just can't be sure." Maya felt a surge of hope, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for your honesty, Ms. Walsh." No further questions. As the clerk stepped down, Maya could feel the shift in the courtroom's energy. The prosecution's case, which had seemed solid that morning, was now riddled with reasonable doubt. She glanced up at Marcus and saw him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, perhaps, mixed with something deeper. The prosecution rested their case that afternoon, and Maya knew the real battle was just beginning. That evening, she worked late in her hotel room, preparing for the defense's opening arguments. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The Maya I knew never gave up on anything. Don't start now." And Maya stared at the message for a long time, her heart pounding. After 20 years of silence, Marcus was reaching out, offering encouragement in the most subtle way possible. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on, "Some promises are worth keeping." The next morning, Maya opened the defense's case with a strategy that was both risky and necessary. Instead of simply trying to create reasonable doubt, she was going to present an alternative theory of the crime, one that would require her to take some significant gambles. Her first witness was Dr. Patricia Coleman, a forensic psychologist who had evaluated DeShawn. Dr. Coleman testified about the young man's character, his lack of any history of violence, and the psychological profile that made him an unlikely candidate for armed robbery. In my professional opinion, Dr. Coleman concluded, Mr. Williams does not fit the behavioral pattern of someone who would commit a violent crime like armed robbery. His psychological profile suggests someone who avoids confrontation, not someone who would initiate it. The prosecution's cross-examination was aggressive, but Dr. Coleman held her ground. Maya could see the jury absorbing the testimony, their expressions becoming more thoughtful, more questioning. Maya's next witness was unexpected, DeShawn's mother, Patricia Williams. The woman was in her 40s but looked older, worn down by years of struggle and worry. She testified about her son's character, his dreams of going to college, his part-time job at a local community center helping younger kids with their homework. DeShawn has never been in trouble, she said, her voice strong despite her obvious nervousness. He's always been the one trying to keep other kids out of trouble. The night this happened, he was walking home from the community center. He volunteers there 3 nights a week, helping kids with math and reading. Maya presented documentation of DeShawn's volunteer work, his high school grades, and character references from teachers and community leaders. Slowly, methodically, she was building a picture of a young man who was nothing like the violent criminal the prosecution had described. But Maya's most important witness was yet to come. On the 3rd day of the defense, she called Marcus Thompson, no relation to the judge, despite the shared name, a retired Detroit police detective who had investigated similar cases for 30 years. Detective Thompson was a distinguished black man in his 60s, with the kind of presence that commanded respect. Maya had found him during her investigation, and his insights had shaped her entire defense strategy. Detective Thompson, Maya began, you've reviewed the evidence in this case. In your professional opinion, was this investigation conducted properly? Thompson's answer was measured but damning. No, counselor, it was not. There were several significant oversights that would be considered substandard in any proper investigation. Can you elaborate? First, the suspect description given over the radio was vague and could have applied to dozens of young men in the area. Second, no canvass was conducted of the neighborhood to look for witnesses or additional evidence. Third, the fact that the defendant was wearing different clothing than described and had significantly less money than was reported stolen should have prompted further investigation. Maya walked Thompson through each aspect of the investigation, highlighting the shortcuts, the assumptions, and the rush to judgment that had characterized the case. By the time she finished, the prosecution's narrative had been thoroughly dismantled. During Thompson's testimony, Maya noticed Marcus leaning forward slightly, his attention completely focused on the witness. She could almost see him processing the information, weighing it against his own understanding of police procedure and judicial fairness. The final piece of Maya's defense was the most risky. She had DeShawn take the stand on his own behalf. It was always dangerous to put a defendant on the stand, but Maya knew that the jury needed to hear from him directly. DeShawn was nervous but sincere. He spoke about his life, his dreams, his volunteer work with younger kids who reminded him of himself. He described the night of the robbery, how he'd been walking home from the community center when Officer Richards had approached him. I was scared, DeShawn admitted. When a police car pulls up next to you, and you're a young black man walking alone at night, you get scared. I didn't run because I knew that would make me look guilty, but I was terrified. Did you rob that convenience store? Maya asked directly. No, ma'am. I have never stolen anything in my life. I was raised better than that. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal, but DeShawn held up well. He answered every question honestly, never getting defensive or angry, even when the prosecutor tried to provoke him. When DeShawn stepped down, Maya could see that several jurors were moved by his testimony. More importantly, she could see that Marcus was moved as well. For just a moment, his judicial mask slipped, and she saw the boy she'd once known, the one who had always believed in fighting for the underdog. The closing arguments were passionate on both sides. The prosecutor argued that despite the defense's attempts to muddy the waters, the evidence clearly pointed to DeShawn's guilt. Maya argued that the prosecution had failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that rushing to judgment based on assumptions and stereotypes was exactly the kind of injustice the legal system was supposed to prevent. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Maya concluded, DeShawn Williams is not on trial here because of what he did. He's on trial because of who he is, a young black man in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught up in a system that was too quick to assume his guilt. Don't let that assumption become a conviction. Look at the evidence, really look at it, and ask yourselves, has the prosecution proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt? I submit to you that they have not. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood with the verdict in her hands. The courtroom was silent as she read, "In the case of the state of Michigan versus DeShawn Williams, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted. Sean collapsed into tears, his mother rushing forward to embrace him. Maya felt her own eyes filling with tears as she watched the reunion, but her gaze was drawn upward, to the bench, where Marcus sat with an expression of quiet satisfaction. As the courtroom emptied, Maya gathered her files slowly. DeShawn and his mother had already left, surrounded by family and friends, celebrating his freedom. Maya was alone at the defense table when Marcus approached. "That was exceptional work," he said quietly. Maya looked up at him. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Marcus sat down in the chair beside her, and for a moment, they were just two people who had once known each other very well. "I owe you an explanation," Marcus said finally. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, 20 years ago, I made a choice that hurt you, and I've regretted it every day since." Maya waited, her heart pounding. "My sophomore year at Harvard, my mother got sick, cancer. She didn't want me to know, didn't want me to come home and sacrifice my education. But when I found out, I realized I had to choose between my dreams and my family. I came home, took care of her, worked nights to pay for her treatment. She made me promise not to tell you, not to drag you down with me. Marcus, she survived, but it took 3 years. By the time I could go back to school, I felt like too much time had passed. I thought you'd moved on, built a new life. I thought it would be selfish to try to come back into yours." Maya felt tears streaming down her face. "You idiot. Do you really think I would have seen taking care of your mother as being dragged down? I would have helped. We could have figured it out together. I know that now, but I was 20, and scared, and I made the wrong choice. I've been paying for it ever since." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 20 years of misunderstanding settling between them. "I kept track of you," Marcus admitted. "Your cases, your wins, your reputation. I was so proud, and so sorry that I wasn't there to see it happen." "I kept track of you too," Maya said softly. "Youngest federal judge in Michigan. You did exactly what you said you'd do. We both did. Just separately." Maya looked around the empty courtroom, the scene of so much pain and justice, conflict and resolution. "What now?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in 20 years, it was the smile she remembered from their youth. Now I think two old friends have a lot of catching up to do. And maybe we can finally keep that promise we made on your grandmother's porch. About changing the world together." As they walked out of the courthouse together, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, not just for herself, but for the system they'd both devoted their lives to serving. They'd found their way back to each other, and maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make the justice system work the way it was supposed to. The late afternoon sun streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Maya and Marcus walked slowly, neither of them in a hurry to end this moment of reunion and reconciliation. "You know what I realized today?" Maya said as they reached the courthouse steps. "What's that?" "That case, DeShawn's case. It wasn't just about proving his innocence. It was about proving that the system can work when people care enough to make it work." Marcus nodded. "You made it work. You saved that kid's life." "We made it work," Maya corrected. "You could have recused yourself, avoided all of this. But you didn't. You stayed, and you made sure he got a fair trial. It's what we promised we'd do, isn't it? Fight for justice no matter what. Maya smiled. Some promises are worth keeping, even if it takes 20 years. As they stood on the courthouse steps, watching the city bustle around them, both Maya and Marcus knew that this was more than just the end of a trial. It was the beginning of something new, a second chance at the friendship they'd lost. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to make the difference they'd always dreamed of making. The boy and girl who had once sat on a porch in Detroit, planning to change the world, had finally found their way back to each other. And this time, they weren't going to let anything pull them apart. Because some friendships are stronger than time, distance, or even the pain of separation. When those friendships are built on a foundation of shared values and common purpose, they can survive anything, even 20 years of silence. In the end, Maya thought as she watched Marcus hail a cab, justice wasn't just about verdicts and legal precedent. It was about people, flawed, complicated people, choosing to do the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when it meant confronting the past they'd tried so hard to forget. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, justice came with a second chance.